Yesterday we were talking about how to calculate the area of a rectangle or a square. So as you remember, the formula for that is length times width, right? So we have L times W equals the area. So again, just to review, if I were to measure this side, I would get 2 inches, and over here I would get 8 inches. So my calculation with my formula, length times width, would be 2 times 8. And again, my answer would be in square inches in this instant, because that's what I'm in this instance, because that's what I'm measuring. So what is 2 times 8? It is 16. And just again to show you what area really means is it's the space inside an object. So we're always thinking about how do we put square units on top of something that we're measuring so that we can figure out what the area is. So what we're going to do today is a little bit different than length times width. We're going to be thinking about area in a totally different way. So what you're going to need is your square paper that I sent to your parents in their email. And what you're going to do with that square paper is you're going to trace your hand just like I did. You're going to put your hand down and you're going to measure the area inside the outline of your hand. Okay, so that's what you're going to be doing in just a minute. Don't get started on that yet, because we're going to take a look at my hand, and I want you to think about what are some strategies using length times width that you could use to calculate the area. What do you think you could do here? Because this looks complicated, doesn't it? It's not length times width anymore, is it? It has different parts of square units. It has fractions of the square unit, right? So we're going to have to be using all of our good knowledge of fractions that we just learned to help calculate this. But one strategy that I think I'm going to use is I'm going to look for length times width wherever I can. So what I mean by that, and you don't need a ruler to do this, I'm going to just use a ruler to go fast. I'm going to look for squares and rectangles within my hand, and then I'm going to count my fractions later. And this grid paper actually is, it's divided into centimeters. So what we're calculating right now are centimeters, okay? I'm going to take this one a little bit farther, and do you kind of get a feeling for what I'm doing here? Where I'm going to look for squares and rectangles so I can calculate fast. So let's do this one together here. So I have a length times a width. Does it look like a square? It almost does, doesn't it? So let's count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this side is 8, and I'm going to make myself a little note there, just because I can forget things easily sometimes. And then on this side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this is a perfect square. So without counting all the squares, because we want to use a formula to help us go fast, we're going to multiply length times width. So 8 times 8 is, I'm going to write it here, 8 times 8 equals 64 centimeters cm squared. So that would be my answer for this part of my hand, right? Do you see any other rectangles we could possibly calculate that would make this easier? I see this one right here. So this is 1, the width is 1, right? And how many squares down is that? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 squares. So it's 8 times 1. So the area here is 8 square centimeters. So now I have 64 plus 8. So I'm starting to find rectangles that are helping me go faster. And then what I'm going to do is when I don't have any rectangles left, like, let's see, right here I see a rectangle. See that little baby rectangle right there? I know the area is 3 centimeters squared because I just counted them, 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to do that with as many rectangles or squares that I can find, and then what I'm going to need to do is start adding up parts of squares when I'm completely done. And this is going to be estimation for you. This isn't going to be, you're not going to be adding a bunch of different types of fractions. You're just going to estimate, and I'm going to give you an example. So do you see up here where I have part of a square here, and part of one there, and part of one here, and part of one there, and these are smaller? I'm going to call this one square unit. Okay, so in my mind that's going to be 1 square unit, and I might just write myself a note right there so I can remember that. Okay, so that would be 1, and then I'd go looking for more partials, right? So do you see how this one plus this one could make one whole square? So that one, I would write a note to myself that given that it's not the shape of a square or a rectangle because it has this curved side, I'm going to make myself a little note and just put a 1 in there. I would know that's a 1. And I think what this activity will do for you, this isn't going to be easy, but what it's going to do for you is it's going to help you think about fractions, and it's also going to help you think about what is the area of something. There's actually lakes in New York State that are called the Finger Lakes, and if you look up a picture of them, they look like really long fingers, but they're made of water. So if you look at the map, it covers a huge area of land, but there's several of these lakes that are kind of in a row, just like fingers, just like this. And so if someone needed to calculate the area of the lake, then they would need to do something similar to this, except they would have very fancy tools other than us just counting. But there's lots of objects in the world where we need to know the area that are not in a perfect square or in a rectangle. So your task right now is to go ahead and calculate how many squares you see altogether. And then what I'd like you to do is, once you have it calculated, write your final answer and then post this on Padlet, because I'm curious how many square centimeters your hand is. That's kind of interesting, and it'll be fun to compare it to other kids' hands on Padlet as well. Remember, if you're doing fractions, don't get too technical. Like, see this one, you can add this little part right there to another part to make a whole. Like maybe you could combine this with that and call that a whole. You're using your spatial ability to kind of estimate here. So take your time, do a good job, don't get frustrated, do as many rectangles and squares as you can to make it easier, and then start counting the little partial squares. Okay, good luck with this.